Elias Vren had always been a man of curiosity, but his love for discovery came with a price. Born in the bustling city station of Nova Orbis, where humanity thrived among the stars, Elias was different. He wasn't interested in power games, social status, or the cold, calculated alliances that defined human relationships. Instead, his heart longed for something pure, something real, something no one around him seemed to value. At 32, Elias had become a respected xenobiologist, known for his groundbreaking work on alien ecosystems. But respect for his work didn't translate into acceptance. Among his peers and society, he was seen as an oddity. Women, in particular, avoided him, finding his idealistic views on love and connection either naive or laughable. To them, Elias was a dreamer in a world where practicality reigned supreme. "You'll die alone, Elias," one of his colleagues had once said during a heated debate. The words had stung, but he hid it behind a polite smile. Deep down, he knew they might be right. One quiet evening on the research outpost, Helios IV, Elias sat alone in his lab, surrounded by glowing monitors and the hum of advanced machines. His focus was on decoding signals from distant star systems, a task most dismissed as a waste of time. But tonight was different. A peculiar signal appeared on his screen, unlike anything he'd ever encountered. It wasn't the usual random noise of the cosmos. This was rhythmic, deliberate, and eerily beautiful. "What are you?" Elias muttered to himself, leaning closer. The signal seemed to repeat itself, almost like a melody. He ran it through translation algorithms, and to his astonishment, fragments of meaning began to emerge. Longing, hope, connection. The words were poetic, almost like a love letter whispered across the void. Elias's heart raced. Could this be an intelligent species? Was someone, or something, out there, reaching out? His fingers danced over the controls, analyzing the signal's origin. It came from a star system uncharted by humanity, far beyond the Federation's borders. A surge of excitement mixed with trepidation coursed through him. As he worked, his mind wandered. What kind of beings could send such a message? Were they anything like humans? Would they understand him if he tried to reply? For the first time in years, Elias felt a flicker of hope, a possibility that perhaps somewhere out there, he might find the connection he had always yearned for. But the Federation wouldn't approve of an unsanctioned expedition. Regulations were strict, and venturing into uncharted space was forbidden without authorization. Yet Elias couldn't let this go. This signal wasn't just a scientific curiosity. It was a chance at something greater than himself. For a man shunned by his own kind, the possibility of discovering an alien heart that understood his own was worth any risk. As the signal's melody echoed in his mind, Elias made his decision. He would follow it. No matter the cost, he would find the source. And maybe, just maybe, he would finally discover where he truly belonged. Elias Vren stood in the docking bay of Helios IV, staring at his small exploration vessel, the Odyssey. It wasn't the fastest ship, nor the most advanced, but it was reliable, and more importantly, it was his. The starry expanse beyond the bay doors seemed to beckon him, calling him toward the uncharted system, where the mysterious signal originated. He had spent the entire night secretly preparing for this journey. The Federation's rules were clear. Unauthorized exploration was a punishable offense. Elias knew the risks, but the allure of the signal, the poetic words of longing and hope, had ignited something deep within him. This wasn't just about science anymore. This was about finding something meaningful in a universe that had always felt cold and indifferent. As he checked his ship's systems one last time, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "Elias, what are you doing?" It was Dr. Amara Kalin, one of his few colleagues who occasionally showed him kindness. She stood at the entrance to the bay, her arms crossed and a look of concern on her face. Elias hesitated. He could lie, but Amara was sharp. She'd see through it. "I'm going after the signal," he admitted. "There's something out there, Amara. Something incredible. She frowned. You can't be serious. Do you realize how dangerous this is? If the Federation finds out, you'll lose your license, your career, maybe even your freedom. I know, Elias said, meeting her gaze. But this isn't just another anomaly. The signal, it feels different. It's like someone is trying to reach out. Someone who understands. Understands what? Amara asked, her voice softening. What it's like to be alone. Elias replied. To long for something you've never had. For a moment, Amara didn't say anything. Then she sighed and shook her head. You're impossible, Elias. But if anyone can make sense of this, it's you. Just be careful, okay? He nodded, grateful for her concern. I will. Moments later, the Odyssey roared to life, its engines humming with a quiet power. As the ship lifted off and soared into the stars, Elias felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. The uncharted system lay weeks away, beyond the borders of known space. The journey would be long and dangerous, but Elias had made up his mind. This was his chance to find something, someone, that truly mattered. Days turned into weeks as he traveled through the void, guided by the signal's steady pulse. Along the way, he recorded notes and analyzed the fragments of meaning in the transmission. The more he studied it, the more he became convinced it wasn't random. This was intentional. This was a message. Finally, the uncharted system came into view. A single planet stood out, a vibrant sphere of blues and greens, glowing faintly in the light of its star. This was the source. This was where the signal had come from. Elias's heart pounded as he set a course for the planet. He didn't know what awaited him, but one thing was certain. His life was about to change forever. As the Odyssey descended through the atmosphere of the mysterious planet, Elias Vren could hardly contain his excitement. The planet was unlike anything he had ever seen. Vast oceans glittered under a pale golden sun, while emerald forests stretched endlessly across the continents. Bioluminescent rivers carved glowing patterns through the land, shimmering like liquid starlight. This is incredible, Elias whispered to himself, his hands trembling on the controls. The air was breathable, the atmosphere stable, a perfect environment for life. His sensors detected faint energy readings scattered across the surface, but their patterns were unlike anything human technology could explain. He landed the ship in a clearing near a glowing river, surrounded by towering trees with translucent leaves that shimmered in every color of the spectrum. The air was thick with the scent of something sweet and floral, and strange bird-like creatures flitted through the canopy, their wings leaving trails of light in the air. Elias stepped out of his ship, his boots crunching softly on the mossy ground. Every sound, every sight seemed alive with purpose, as though the planet itself was a living being. He activated his portable scanner, searching for the origin of the signal. The device beeped, pointing him toward the river. The signal's strength was growing. As he followed the river's edge, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest was too quiet now, the creatures that had been singing moments ago now silent. Elias's hand hovered near his holstered pulse pistol, a precaution he hoped he wouldn't need. Suddenly, he felt a presence, an unexplainable weight in the air, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Before he could react, a figure emerged from the trees ahead. Elias froze, his heart racing. The being before him was humanoid but unmistakably alien. She stood taller than him, her slender frame adorned with intricate, glowing patterns that pulsed softly with a light of their own. Her skin was a deep, opalescent shade that shifted colors like an oil slick under sunlight. Her eyes were large, almond-shaped, and shone with an otherworldly silver hue. She looked at him with a mix of curiosity and caution. For a long moment, neither moved. Elias slowly raised his hands, a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice steady but filled with awe. I'm just trying to understand." The alien tilted her head, as though considering his words. Then, to Elias's astonishment, she raised her hand and placed it over her chest. A faint hum resonated in the air, and her glowing patterns shifted into a soft blue. It was as if she were speaking, not with words, but through energy and emotion. Elias took a step closer, his scanner now beeping wildly. "Are you the one who sent the signal?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The alien nodded slowly, her glowing patterns intensifying. A warmth spread through Elias's chest. For the first time in his life, he felt truly seen. The adventure had only just begun. Elias stood motionless, staring at the alien being before him. Her glowing patterns pulsed with a soft rhythm, shifting from deep blues to gentle greens, as if reflecting her emotions. Though they couldn't yet speak the same language, Elias felt her intentions. There was no hostility, only curiosity. He pointed to himself, carefully enunciating his name. "Elias," he said slowly, tapping his chest. The alien tilted her head, her silver eyes shimmering like liquid metal. She hesitated before pointing to herself, her patterns momentarily flickering. Her voice, when it came, was melodic, almost like a song, but Elias couldn't understand the words she spoke. "Your name," he guessed, his tone gentle. She nodded, repeating the sound. It was intricate, flowing, and impossible for Elias to replicate. After a few failed attempts, she let out a soft sound, perhaps slaughter, and motioned toward the glowing patterns on her arm. A single design shifted into what looked like a spiral, surrounded by smaller orbs. Elias smiled. "I'll call you Elira," he said, improvising a name that felt fitting. To his relief, she didn't object. For hours, they communicated through gestures, expressions, and the glow of her patterns. Elira seemed fascinated by Elias's equipment, especially his portable scanner, though she didn't touch it. Instead, she motioned for him to follow her deeper into the forest. The invitation was clear, and though his instincts told him to be cautious, Elias felt an unshakable trust in her. The forest around them grew more vibrant as they walked, the bioluminescent plants glowing brighter in Elira's presence. She led him to a clearing where an enormous crystalline structure rose from the ground. It pulsed with the same energy he had detected earlier, the same rhythm as the signal. "This is it," Elias murmured, his breath catching. "This is where the signal came from." Elira reached out and placed her hand on the crystal. The patterns on her skin synced perfectly with the glowing structure, and a soft hum filled the air. Elias watched, transfixed, as symbols and images began to appear on the crystal surface. Some were clearly Zivarath, her people's language, but others resembled human glyphs, even mathematical equations. This is incredible," Elias said, stepping closer. "You're using this to communicate across space." Elira nodded and motioned to him, encouraging him to touch the crystal. He hesitated, then placed his hand on its cool surface. A sudden warmth spread through him, followed by a flood of images and feelings. It wasn't like human communication. It was more direct, more raw. He saw glimpses of Elira's world, her people, her struggles, her isolation. Elias's heart ached as he realized something profound. Elira was just like him. She, too, was an outcast, searching for connection in a universe that had turned its back on her. "I understand," he said softly, though he wasn't sure if she could comprehend his words. "You're not alone anymore." For the first time, Elira's patterns turned a brilliant gold, radiating warmth. Elias didn't need a translator to understand. She was telling him she felt the same. Elias spent the next few days in awe of Elira's world. She had welcomed him into her village, a stunning haven of crystalline structures nestled among the glowing trees. The Zivarath people, like Elira, communicated through their bioluminescent patterns and emotional harmonies. Their language was unlike anything Elias had encountered, yet its beauty resonated with him deeply. The Zivarath were cautious around him at first, their glowing patterns dimming whenever he approached. Elira, however, remained by his side, acting as a bridge between him and her people. She demonstrated his tools to them, his scanner, his translator, and even shared the sketches he had made of their world. Slowly, the others began to trust him, their lights growing brighter in his presence. Elias couldn't stop marveling at how deeply connected the Zivarath were to their environment. The trees, rivers, and even the air seemed alive, as though the planet itself was an extension of their being. Elira explained, through gestures and the occasional word translated by his device, that the crystal structures were not just homes, but vital energy conduits for their world. These crystals powered their lives and maintained the delicate balance of their ecosystem. But there was trouble brewing beneath the surface. One evening, as Elias worked on repairing his damaged ship, Elira approached him. Her patterns were flickering with urgency, shifting between deep blues and sharp yellows. She gestured toward the sky, where faint streaks of light hinted at a coming storm. Elias furrowed his brow, checking his atmospheric sensors. The data confirmed her concern. A massive energy storm was heading toward the village. "How bad is it?" Elias asked, even though he knew she wouldn't understand the words. Elira didn't need to reply. The fear in her eyes told him everything. Without hesitation, Elias grabbed his tools and followed her to the main crystal tower in the center of the village. The Zivarath were gathered there, their patterns flashing in chaotic, discordant rhythms. They were afraid, and Elias could see why. The storm wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It was disrupting the energy field of the crystals. If they lost power, the village's delicate balance could collapse. Elias stepped forward, his confidence surprising even himself. "I can help," he said firmly, pointing to himself and then to the crystals. Elira translated his intentions, her glowing patterns pulsing with urgency as she relayed his words to the others. The village elders hesitated, their lights dimming as they conferred. Finally, one of them stepped aside, gesturing for Elias to proceed. He nodded, setting to work immediately. Using his knowledge of energy systems, he began stabilizing the crystal's output, patching weak points, and redirecting energy flows. Elira stayed by his side, assisting him wherever she could. Despite the storm raging around them, Elias felt a strange calm. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone. He was part of something greater. Hours later, as the storm finally passed, the crystals began to glow steadily once more. The village erupted in harmonious lights of gratitude, and Elira's patterns shone brighter than ever. She turned to Elias, her golden hues radiating warmth, and for a moment, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: belonging. Elias smiled, realizing he had found something here he never thought possible. Maybe, just maybe, this was the connection he had been searching for all along. Elias stood at the edge of the Zivarath village, staring up at the darkening sky. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet calm that felt almost too perfect. Yet, a sense of unease lingered in the air, something he couldn't shake. He had helped the Zivarath, and they had accepted him as one of their own. But deep down, Elias knew he couldn't stay forever. His mission was to explore and understand the universe. But now, he had found something far more important. He had found connection, peace, and maybe even love in Elira. Still, he couldn't ignore the nagging thought in the back of his mind. Humanity would never let him keep this discovery to himself. Suddenly, his communicator beeped in his pocket. Elias pulled it out, eyes narrowing as he read the incoming message. It was from the Federation, and the tone was stern. "Elias Friend, you are hereby ordered to return immediately. Your unauthorized journey into uncharted space is a violation of Federation policy. Return to Nova Orbis for reassignment." His heart sank. He had known this would happen, but now it felt real. The Federation didn't care about the Zivarath. They cared about power, resources, and control. Elias had already broken their laws, and they would never allow him to keep this alien discovery hidden. Before he could react, Elira appeared beside him, her glowing patterns flickering with concern. She could feel his tension, his uncertainty. She raised her hand, gently placing it on his shoulder, a silent offer of comfort. "I can't go back," Elias muttered, almost to himself. If I go back, they'll take you. They'll exploit your people, use your world for their own gain. Elira's eyes locked with his, her silvery gaze filled with understanding. She knew what the Federation would do. They had already seen how humanity treated their own kind. What would they do to a species they saw as weaker, as something to conquer? Elias could see the fear in her eyes, but there was also something else. Determination. We won't let them take you, Elias whispered, more to himself than to her. I promise. But as the night wore on, he realized the truth. It wasn't just about Elira or the Zivarath anymore. It was about him too. The Federation had no place for a man who was willing to defy them, especially for something as unprofitable as a peaceful alien race. Elias had already become an outcast in human society, but now he was standing on the precipice of losing everything. The next morning, as Elias prepared to speak with Elira about his plan, he saw the faintest flicker in the sky. The hum of a ship's engines reached his ears. His blood ran cold. The Federation scouts had arrived. They were here. Elias's heart raced. There was no time to lose. He had to act fast before the Federation discovered the Zivarath and their peaceful world. Elira's people were in danger, and so was everything Elias had come to care about. The next steps would be critical. The battle for freedom had just begun. Turning to Elira, Elias gave her a determined look. It's time to fight back. Elias stood at the edge of the Zivarath village, staring at the distant horizon, where the Federation's ships had just appeared. The scout vessels hovered above the planet, their sleek forms cutting through the sky like predators. Elias could feel the tension rising in the air, and the warmth of Elira's hand on his shoulder only slightly eased his anxiety. The Zivarath didn't have the military might to fend off the Federation, but Elias knew he couldn't just stand by and watch them be taken. We need to act fast, Elias said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. Elira nodded, her glowing patterns shifting to a rapid rhythm, a sign of both worry and determination. She motioned to the village elders, who had gathered at the center of the settlement. They were aware of the threat now, and there was no more time to negotiate or hide. Elias could see the fear in their eyes, but also a spark of hope. Can we fight? Elias asked the elder who approached him. The elder's face was solemn, her patterns dimming to a soft, steady glow. She looked to Elira for confirmation before answering. We have energy weapons, she said, but they are primitive compared to your technology. We can slow them down, but we need your help. Elias nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He wasn't a soldier, but he had spent enough time studying military technology to know what they needed. I'll do whatever I can, he replied. As the Federation ships moved closer, Elias quickly gathered his tools and began modifying the Zivarath's energy weapons. The crystals that powered the village had more than enough energy to act as weapons, but they needed to be tuned to a frequency that could disrupt the Federation's advanced shields. Elias worked fast, hands flying over the crystals, recalibrating them to the exact specifications. Elira watched closely, offering her support by powering the crystals with her own energy, her patterns glowing brighter with each passing moment. The first blast from the Federation ship hit the atmosphere with a sharp crack, sending ripples through the air. The Zivarath panicked, but Elias remained calm. Hold steady, he called out. We're not out of this yet. The villagers, now equipped with energy weapons powered by the crystals, took their positions around the village, hiding in the trees and behind structures. Elias, alongside Elira, stood by the main crystal tower, ready to unleash the full force of their combined energy. The first Federation ship broke through the atmosphere, its engines roaring as it prepared to land. Without hesitation, Elias activated the weapon, and a pulse of bright light shot from the crystal tower, striking the ship with an intense blast of energy. The ship's shields flickered but held strong. Keep firing, Elias shouted, urging the Zivarath to keep attacking. We need to keep them off balance. The Zivarath fired in unison, their weapons sending waves of energy at the Federation ship. Elira's patterns flickered in time with the shots, amplifying the energy of each blast. Elias felt a rush of adrenaline as the first Federation ship began to wobble in the sky, its shields weakening. But they weren't out of danger yet. More ships were coming, and the Zivarath's weapons, while powerful, weren't enough to stop the full force of the Federation's fleet. Elias's mind raced as he looked at Elira. There had to be a way to tip the scales in their favor. "Do you have any other weapons?" he asked urgently. Elira looked at him, her eyes determined. She nodded and motioned to the massive crystal structures. They were more than just homes. They were the heart of the Zivarath's power. If Elias could figure out how to channel the energy through them, they might have a chance to stop the Federation for good. With a deep breath, Elias made his decision. "We're going to use everything we have," he said. "It's time to turn the tide." The battle raged on. The sky above the Zivarath village was lit with flashes of energy, as Federation ships circled, their shields absorbing each blast from the Zivarath's weapons. Elias and Elira stood by the main crystal tower, their hands working together to channel more energy into the Zivarath's weapons. But even with the power of the crystals, they couldn't hold off the Federation forever. They needed a new plan, and fast. Elias glanced at Elira, whose glowing patterns flickered in nervous anticipation. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. If they didn't stop the Federation soon, they would be overwhelmed. He turned his attention to the massive crystal structures that dotted the landscape. The Zivarath had always used them to harness the planet's energy, but now Elias saw their true potential. "I think I have an idea," he said, his voice filled with resolve. "We can amplify the energy through the crystal network and release a burst strong enough to disable the Federation's ships. But it's going to take everything we've got." Elira's eyes widened in understanding. She nodded quickly, her patterns pulsing with determination. She reached out, placing a hand on the crystal at their feet, channeling her energy into it. Just as Elias prepared to make the adjustments, a loud explosion shook the ground. One of the Federation ships had landed, and it was coming for them. Elias's heart skipped a beat. They didn't have much time. Suddenly, a loud voice rang out from behind them. "Elias, stop." Elias spun around to see a figure approaching, one he didn't expect. It was a Zivarath elder, but not one he had seen before. This was someone he didn't recognize, and their energy patterns were dark and erratic, unlike the rest of the Zivarath's peaceful colors. The elder's voice was filled with fear. "You don't know what you're doing. The energy from the crystals, if you release it, you'll destroy everything. It will tear the planet apart." Elias stared at the elder, confused and unsure. "But if we don't act now, the Federation will destroy everything we've built. The planet will fall into their hands." The elder's eyes flashed with cold anger. "You don't understand. I've been waiting for this moment. All of you, your people, your technology. It's all just a tool. I've been working with the Federation to bring about this moment. The Zivarath were never meant to remain hidden. We were meant to be part of their empire. You're a fool to think otherwise." Elias's stomach dropped. Betrayal. The very people he had trusted were willing to sacrifice everything just to join the Federation. It wasn't just the Federation that was a threat. It was one of the Zivarath elders, working from within. Before Elias could react, the elder made a quick motion. A beam of energy shot from his hand, striking the crystal tower. The massive structure shook, and the hum of the planet's power began to falter. The crystals flickered, their glow weakening. "No," Elias shouted, rushing toward the tower. "You're destroying everything." Elira's patterns flared in panic, her eyes glowing brightly as she tried to channel more energy into the crystal. But it was too late. The elder had sabotaged the very source of their power. "You've made a mistake, Elias." The elder sneered. "This is the beginning of the end. There's no stopping the Federation now." Elias's heart sank as he realized the full scope of the betrayal. The elder had sabotaged their last hope. The Zivarath would fall. and with them, everything he had fought for. But as the elder turned to leave, Alara stepped forward, her voice steady. She didn't need words. Her patterns pulsed with a fierce light, full of defiance. She wasn't going to let the elder win. Elias turned to Alara, his eyes filled with a mix of desperation and hope. What now? Alira's light flickered brightly. There was still one more chance, one final act of defiance. The battle was far from over. Elias's mind raced as the Zivarath elder's betrayal set in. The crystals, the very heart of the planet's power, had been damaged. With the Federation ships closing in, the situation felt hopeless. But even in the face of this overwhelming darkness, Elias could see something in Alira's eyes, something he had never seen before, a fierce determination to protect her people and their world. Alira stepped forward, her patterns glowing with an intensity Elias had never witnessed. She was not giving up. In that moment, Elias realized that it wasn't just the Zivarath's power or technology that could save them, it was their unity. And now, it was up to him and Alira to ignite that unity in the face of overwhelming odds. "We can still do this," Elias said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We just need to focus. The crystal network might be damaged, but we can still use what's left to send a signal. If we combine our strengths, we can channel the energy directly into the Federation ships and disable them." Alira's glowing patterns flickered in agreement, and without hesitation, she placed her hand on the crystal again. Elias joined her, his hand steady as he helped adjust the energy flow, trying to stabilize what was left. They had only a short time before the Federation ships would land, and they needed to act fast. "I'll reroute the energy through the secondary crystals," Elias said, working quickly, his mind focused solely on the task at hand. But even as he worked, a sense of calm washed over him. It wasn't just the energy they were channeling. It was the connection between him and Alira, the bond that had formed between them, something stronger than any technology or weapon. Together, they were more powerful than either of them could be alone. Alira's patterns pulsed with a radiant light, and Elias felt her strength filling him, pushing him to work faster, more efficiently. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting for each other, for the love and loyalty that had grown between them over the past weeks. In that moment, Elias knew he would never let the Federation take Alira, and he would never let them destroy this beautiful world. The first Federation ship entered the atmosphere, its engines roaring as it descended toward the village. Elias could see the soldiers on board, ready to land and take control. The time had come. With one final adjustment, Elias and Alira channeled the remaining energy through the crystal network. The result was immediate. A massive surge of light erupted from the crystal towers, shooting toward the Federation ships. The first shift shields began to flicker and falter. A few moments later, it dropped from the sky, crashing into the jungle below. The other ships hesitated, but they didn't retreat. They tried to push forward, but the Zivarath's energy was too strong. Alira's patterns blazed brighter, and Elias felt his heart race. Together, they had done it. They had turned the tide. But the Federation wasn't going to back down so easily. More ships arrived, this time in greater numbers. Elias knew they couldn't keep this up forever. But with Alira at his side, with their bond stronger than ever, he refused to give in. They would fight until the end, no matter the cost. "Alira," Elias said, his voice filled with determination. "We're not alone. We have each other, and we have this world, and we're not going to let them take it from us." Alira's glowing patterns flashed in response, bright, defiant, and filled with hope. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about love, loyalty, and the will to protect what mattered most. The battle for freedom was far from over, but with each other, Elias and Alira knew they had a chance to win. The battle had raged for hours, and the sun was beginning to set, casting a blood-red glow across the sky. Elias and Alira stood together, their hands firmly placed on the central crystal that powered the Zivarath village. The energy surging through the crystal was still strong, but it was clear that they couldn't keep up the fight much longer. The Federation ships had taken heavy damage, but they were relentless, pressing forward with their superior numbers. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow. His eyes locked with Elira's. He could see the exhaustion in her glowing patterns, but there was also a fierce determination in her eyes. She wouldn't give up. Not now, not ever, and neither would he. "We need a final plan," Elias said, his voice filled with urgency. "If we don't stop them now, they'll overwhelm us." Elira's patterns flickered as she thought. Then she made a motion to the sky, pointing toward the distant stars. Elias's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to take the fight beyond the planet. She wanted to strike at the Federation's ships in orbit, to end this once and for all. "You can do that?" Elias asked, his voice filled with awe. Elira nodded. She had the ability to focus the Zivarith energy through the crystals, to amplify it to an unimaginable degree. With the power of the planet itself, she could create a beam strong enough to reach the Federation's flagship in orbit, potentially disabling it. Elias understood the risk. It would take all of Elira's strength, and if it didn't work, they could lose everything. The Zivarith, their world, and any chance of a future together. But Elias knew they had no other choice. This was their last chance. "I'm with you," he said, his voice filled with resolve. "Whatever it takes." Elira's patterns flared brightly, and she placed her hand on the crystal once more, channeling every ounce of her energy into it. Elias could feel the power building, a hum in the air that vibrated through his very bones. He stood beside her, his hand on the crystal, offering whatever strength he had left. The Federation's ships were descending now, their landing thrusters firing as they prepared to strike. The sky above the village was filled with their dark silhouettes, blocking out the stars. Elias could hear the distant sound of their engines, the threat drawing closer with every passing second. Elira's glowing patterns shone like a beacon in the dark, and with a final powerful surge, the crystal unleashed a blinding beam of energy. It shot into the sky, a brilliant column of light that pierced through the Federation ships, cutting through their shields and sending shockwaves rippling through the atmosphere. The Federation's flagship, the largest of the ships, was the first to fall. Its engines sputtered, sparks flying from the damaged hull. One by one, the other ships began to falter, their systems overwhelmed by the sheer force of the energy. The remaining ships turned and fled, unable to withstand the Zivarith's power. For a long moment, there was silence. The Federation was retreating, their invasion defeated. The village, the Zivarith, and Elira's homeworld were safe. Elias turned to Elira, a sense of awe and relief washing over him. She had done it. They had done it. Together, they had won. Elira's glowing patterns faded to a soft, peaceful hue. She stepped closer to Elias, her eyes meeting his. There were no more words needed. They had fought side by side, risking everything for the world they both now held dear. Elias reached out, gently touching her hand. "This isn't the end," Elias said softly, looking out at the horizon. "It's just the beginning." Elira nodded, her smile as bright as the stars above them. Together, they would build a future, one where love and loyalty were stronger than any force the universe could throw at them. And under the golden sky, with the threat of the Federation gone, Elias and Elira stood hand in hand, ready to face the dawn of a new era.